What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be having a deep look at the melee mechanics in Modern Warfare for both multiplayer as well as Warzone. This is something that's been popping up quite a bit lately on my channel. A lot of people asking what's more effective, using your fists or the butt of your gun or a combat knife. So we're going to be answering all of that, as well as a bunch of little things that you may not have known about the melee in this game. So let's kick it off with the different melee types that you'll find in this game and how much damage they deal and how much range they have, as well as how fast you can hit. And the first thing we're going to have a look at, which is one of the big things, this is the amount of damage you deal per hit with each of these different methods. And you can see we have fists, the butt of your gun, the combat knife, the Cali sticks, and the riot shield. And you can see that there is quite a bit of variance here in the amount of damage that you deal. Now, something that's worth noting when it comes to damage, since this is a little bit different in some of the more recent Call of Duty games, is in Modern Warfare, it doesn't matter where you're hitting the enemy player, like where on the body you're hitting them, it deals the same amount of damage. So if you're hitting them in the back versus the front, or the head versus the foot, that's irrelevant, you deal the same amount of damage. And you can clearly see here, the only method that's going to give you a guaranteed one-hit kill in core game modes is the combat knife. Everything else is going to take you at least 2 hits to kill unless the enemy has already been hurt from a different source. Now, there are a few exceptions to this and some interesting things you can do to actually increase your damage or change up the damage, but we'll look at that in a little bit. We're just looking at the basics to start with here. The next thing I want to have a look at is the amount of range that you have. So the lunge distance, how close to your target do you have to be in order to get a hit on the enemy player? And you can see for the most part, it's just 1.5 meters for our fists, the weapon butt, as well as the riot shield. However, with the combat knife, it stretches that out just a little bit to 1.6 meters. And then we have the big outlier here, the Cali sticks. The Cali sticks have a crazy lunge distance at 3 meters, which is ridiculous. But of course, the thing that keeps that balance with the combat knife is it takes 2 hits to kill rather than just 1. Now, this still doesn't paint the whole picture here on how effective these are at killing enemy players. The next thing we want to look at is how much of a delay is there between hits with these different melee methods. So what I did is I measured the amount of time between the first hit marker and the second hit marker, assuming it's going to take you 2 swipes to kill. And you can see here with the fists, it's 400 milliseconds. With the butt of the weapon, it does depend on the weapon type. It's roughly 500 milliseconds for SMGs, but that can go up to 600 milliseconds with LMGs. So it's right around that range. Then with a combat knife, this is 500 milliseconds. The Cali sticks are just 200 milliseconds, which is actually faster than I initially measured with the Cali sticks. So I don't know if these got a buff or something since they came out, but the current measurement that I've got is 200 milliseconds, and I tested this multiple times to triple check this. And yeah, that's how fast it is. It's very, very fast. But finally, this leaves us with the riot shield, which is very slow when it comes to this delay at 1.4 seconds. But the big upside with the riot shield is you do this from behind cover. So even though it's much slower, it's definitely got its benefits as well. Another really quick mention here is if you're using fists or the Cali stick where you can use 2 hands individually, so you could punch with the left or the right, and it's up to you whether you hit L2 or R2. A lot of people have been asking, does it change the speed up if you punch with the left hand instead of the right, or if you alternate? And I tested all of these combinations, and while the animations might look different and one might seem faster than the other, in reality, they take the exact same amount of time to hit, so you might as well just use one of them. So just looking at this chart, in regular core game modes with 100 health, it's pretty clear that the combat knife seems to be the best in the sense that you can just get a one-hit kill, although the Cali sticks also definitely have their benefits because they have a crazier lunge range and you can get that second hit off almost instantly anyway, so you're still killing people nearly instantly from pretty much twice the distance as well. Now, like I said, those are the basics. Now let's get into a few little intricacies that you may not have been aware of, and the first one is throwing knives. Throwing knives are quite interesting because not only do they work as throwing knives, which, by the way, each throwing knife will deal 135 damage, the same as a combat knife, so it's a one-hit kill in core game modes, but when the enemy has armor in Warzone, for instance, that's not going to be a one-hit kill, but we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later on. However, the most interesting thing that happens when you're using a throwing knife on your class is it changes up how you melee with the butt of your gun. Instead of hitting somebody with the butt of your gun, you will actually swipe at them with the throwing knife without actually wasting the throwing knife as well. And by doing this, you actually deal the same amount of damage as a combat knife. So you essentially get that free one-hit melee just by having a throwing knife on your class, even though you're not throwing that throwing knife. It is worth noting that you do have to actually have a throwing knife in your inventory. So if you are using a throwing knife on your class, but you've already thrown it, you don't get this benefit. So that's actually a really interesting mechanic with the throwing knife that a lot of people didn't know about. The next thing I wanted to look at is the fast melee perk. And this is a weapon perk, so it only applies to the weapon that's actually in your hand, assuming you have that weapon perk on there. And all this does is it reduces that swipe delay by about 20%. It's not a big change by any means, and generally speaking, it's just not worth using, even if you are planning on meleeing a decent amount. So yeah, I would just stay away from that one. Speaking of weapon attachments though, there is one weapon attachment that's really effective for meleeing, and this is the Breacher device, which can be used on quite a few of the guns in the game. And with this, it's a muzzle attachment, and it's pretty straightforward. It increases your melee damage up to 135, same as a combat knife, but you don't need to use a combat knife or a throwing knife here. You can just hit them with the butt of your gun, and it'll be a one-hit kill in core modes. So finally, there's one last really interesting thing I found with the melee in this game that doesn't really apply to most situations in regular core multiplayer, but it's still something interesting that I found out while doing my testing. I was doing my testing in custom games with 300 health on the enemy player, and what I found is if you're using the fists, and you melee somebody 3 times, you'll be dealing 90 damage, which makes sense, so I take the enemy's health down to 210. However, on that 4th punch, it will actually kill the enemy player that has 210 health. So you're dealing over 210 damage with that 4th punch. I have no idea why this happens at all. And keep in mind, this only happens if you are punching in really quick succession. Like if you punch a couple times, let the enemy heal, and then punch him a couple more times, you're not going to get that massive damage boost. It's just if you hit 4 hits really quickly in a row, you get this huge damage boost for some strange reason. Now again, this doesn't apply to multiplayer, but when you start including armor in Warzone, this actually matters. And that's a good segue into the Warzone testing here. So what I did is I managed to get Enya and I in the same game, but on different teams, and I tested against full health and full armor in each of these scenarios, and I just tested each of these different melee types that I've been looking at. And it turns out with fists, this is going to take 4 hits to kill, which doesn't line up with the 30 damage per hit, because the enemy effectively has 250 health. However, this is where that interesting mechanic that I just talked about comes in. As long as those punches are coming in relatively quick succession, you get a massive damage boost with that 4th hit, and you can down a fully armored player with just 4 hits. As for the next one I tested, this is just with the butt of your gun. This is going to take you 3 hits to get a kill, which makes sense because you are dealing 90 damage per hit. Then after that, with the combat knife, this is just 2 swipes to get a kill, which again, totally lines up, and that makes sense as well. Then with the Kali sticks, it's once again going to be 3 hits to kill. And then finally with the Riot Shield, it's just a 2-hit kill. And that's another scenario where that doesn't actually line up with the amount of damage that the Riot Shield deals. It only deals 60 damage per hit, and yet you can kill somebody that effectively has 250 health with just 2 hits. So this is just another one of those scenarios where it appears that you're getting a massive damage boost on the second hit, as long as that second hit happens relatively quickly after the first one. So there you can see it all together as far as how many hits it's going to take you to kill a fully armored enemy. However, I also wanted to do the testing on our effective time to kill with each one of these, and you can see that right here. With the fist, it's going to take you approximately 1.2 seconds. With the butt of your gun, it takes you roughly 800 milliseconds based on my testing. It kind of depends on the weapon type that you have, but that's kind of like in between the SMG and the LMG speed. You might notice that this timing doesn't really line up with my previous testing on the hit delay for the butt of your weapon. And the reason for this is it appears the delay between the second and third hit is actually reduced for some reason here. But yeah, I measured this frame by frame, and it's about 800 milliseconds. The combat knife is exactly 500 milliseconds. The Kali sticks are actually the fastest at 400 milliseconds. And then finally we have the Riot Shield, which is the slowest out of all of these at 1.4 seconds. So pretty clearly, if you're just trying to drop somebody as fast as possible with melee, the Kali sticks are definitely the way to go. You can get those hits off very quickly. Plus, remember, you've got that crazy lunge range as well. And therefore, they're just clearly the best as far as raw killing potential in Warzone against armored players. And with that, there's one last thing I wanted to mention here, just for those that are curious. It's not technically melee, but I did want to show you guys throwing knives. A lot of people have asked me, is it a one-hit kill with a throwing knife against an armored player? And the answer to that is no, it still just deals 135 damage, and therefore, in order to kill a fully armored enemy, you do have to hit them with 2 throwing knives. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for today's melee breakdown in Modern Warfare. I'd like to know in the comment section below, were you guys surprised by any of these results? Did you guys know about that little mechanic where if you have a throwing knife in your inventory, you actually use that as a melee weapon when you try to swipe with the butt of your gun? And also, what do you guys think about the general effectiveness of melee in this game for both multiplayer as well as Warzone? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.